Today on the Change and Innovation Summit, I'm really excited to introduce Greg Voeller. Greg is a senior consultant with Gagan McDonald, and business leaders of many Fortune 500 companies who are going through significant change rely on Gagan McDonald to help them address the human struggle of change to achieve results. Greg also is driven by helping organizations transform and by helping leaders effectively communicate with stakeholders. For more than 25 years, Greg has guided a number of global Fortune 500 firms in developing and communicating their stories, often during times of significant organizational change. Greg is an active servant leader for the Global Association of Change Management Professionals, and he was a member of the ACMP Standard Working Group of 24 global thought leaders that developed the standard for change management. He's earned his master's degree from Northwestern University, and I'm really pleased to welcome Greg Voeller.
Well, thank you so much, April, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Greg, I was really excited about talking with you today because you know so much about communication and about crafting compelling communication. And I know that you have been doing a lot of work with leaders on crafting compelling communication. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about some of the work you've been doing with leaders these days.
Awesome, April. Really glad to share that, and hopefully very helpful for others of you out there that are listening to this as well too. And clearly, everybody, certainly believes and understands that communication is such a significant part of how you really drive effective change. And as you said in introducing me, it's really how do we drive that acceptance, that human acceptance, if you will, in this process. And so, but here's the thing, right? We all realize the significance of that, but so many leaders and organizations, frankly, at all levels, that's not one of the areas of skills that they've really either studied, practiced, and or developed significantly in their careers. Now, that's not every leader, but a majority of leaders haven't had that type of capability focus to really help drive their overall leadership capabilities as well too. And so, just in that area, I have been just really so blessed to work with so many leaders at different levels in terms of how they really look at building their overall change leadership. And as a very specific component of that is really how they look at effective storytelling. And so that whole storytelling capability, while it's not necessarily something new, it's actually taking on that much more significance and value in today's world, where, as you know, so much data is just being generated every day. And so for how leaders can effectively slice through that overload of data, that's the real opportunity, in terms of really helping drive change on a consistent basis as well.
Well, Greg, I think that what you are saying and that point about helping leaders to be great storytellers, I think that's spot on, because it does feel like many times what we hear from leaders is a lot of maybe statistics or some kind of general detail like, oh, we're changing this. But tell me a little bit about how you help leaders tell that story of, what is changing and what that means for the folks that they lead.
So I'll go back on what I said a minute ago, is that I think one area where many leaders have been coached on is really how to effectively deliver key messages. How you deliver key messages is different in terms of how you frame information and inspiration within a story. So really what we work with, what I've done is really help leaders understand what are those story components and how you bring those important pieces of both logic and emotion together in something that is compelling, that is inspirational, and is motivational. Now, even need to catch myself a little bit there, because sometimes we fall into this trap of thinking that stories always sort of drive towards the happily ever after. In many cases, stories have many different purposes and missions. And so a story can drive towards something that is more magnetic, if you will. Stories can also talk about this current situation in a way that is drawing out the key pieces of why the current state is not stable, is not where we can continue to be with that as well. And so helping leaders understand how to frame those components, not just in a one-time story, by the way, too, but to develop a storytelling capability where they're able to take information and put it into an approach, a version, a narrative, if you will, that is reaches out to people, hits people in a way that it resonates with individuals, and then really allows people to, frankly, somewhat make their own decisions in terms of how they then connect into that particular focus, that particular story.
I think that's really an excellent point, and so I want to follow up a little bit on that. So when you're talking about components and how to help leaders with those components, can you break that down a little bit for us so we can understand, or maybe you might even have an example of a time where you had worked on this so that we can understand a little bit deeper about those components and how we can help our leaders in developing their storytelling capability.
Well, let me talk about three components, April, okay? And the first one I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on because it's one that we're all used to, and that's the conflict and the challenge. Most change initiatives and activities are born out of some conflict and challenge, and it's what we've all been accustomed to wherever we are, frankly, in the world, in understanding what the quote-unquote burning platform is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll park that to the side. What I would also, though, want to challenge leaders to more fully develop is what I'm going to call the possibilities. And so, obviously Cotter in his 8-step model, he talks about building the vision, and all change models talk about that vision component. But let's take that a bit further then. And let's take that a bit further about really unpacking what that vision is, talking about it in a way that what the possibilities can be. So I'd like to almost suggest that, how we move from the burning platform to what I'll call the magnetic bonfire, right? Because a bonfire, it typically traditionally draws us in. It brings us into community, into a dialogue, right? And it's magnetic. And so how can a leader think about those possibilities? They're very much are part of your future state as you go forward. So here's the thing, though, is that most leaders, they get a little cautious when you start talking about possibilities because there's a risk factor involved. There's a risk factor involved of maybe putting yourself out there and frankly, maybe not just following that same course in order to do it. So it's a credibility potential issue, right, for folks? I like to work with leaders and say, how do we just get over that credibility piece, right? Because frankly, what I see is that more and more that magnetic bonfire, that has the opportunity to pull people so significantly in addition to the burning platform, but to pull people, towards what that vision can be. And so how leaders can be more specific about the possibilities, but they don't need to be 100% accurate, with that. And so I think that's an area that as we really get into that with leadership groups, it provides some fascinating dialogue. And you actually see leaders, I think, actually working through their own change journey on that particular component as well. And then the third component, I should say, that I'll bring forward is that, every story since the dawning of time, since you and I were children, April, every story has always had a hero. And I would always want to challenge a leader to think about who the hero is in the story that they are developing and that they are telling. Now, a hero can be an individual, a hero can be a team, a hero can be an organization, a hero can be a cause. There's many different forms that a hero can take. But I think it's important that the hero element be incorporated into organizational stories. And then if I would just take it down to one further level, April, is that it's both to understand how the hero is positively contributing towards that future state, that end state, but it's also to have a realistic discussion that, many heroes, all heroes, have some sort of vulnerabilities. Superman has his kryptonite, for example, right? And it's important within stories to not shy away from those, but actually to think about how is that vulnerability important to be as part of the story? How will that help others relate and resonate to the story and their opportunity to contribute as well, too? So the conflict of challenge, the possibilities, and the hero component, those are three core pieces that we really try to focus on within story development for groups that we work with, leaders that we work with as well.
Wow. I love this. I love this concept because, it reminds me very much of some of the work that Joseph Campbell had done in terms of thinking about, the archetypes and the hero's journey. One thing I have thinking about, and I love this idea of the magnetic bonfire of just like pulling people together because, it's such a great metaphor and a great image to think of people trying to kind of come together and feel connected and sharing information. Um, and then it also reminds me that the hero in many stories, you know, as you said, the hero has vulnerabilities and the hero is not always perfect. The hero is many times flawed. Now, do you work with your leaders on identifying a hero that's maybe not them? Because if they're the hero, then sometimes, uh, they might be off-putting in that way if they're the hero of every story. And then the CEO came and saved the day.
Well, in fact, April, in most cases, we really suggest to leaders that they are not the hero, that they are thinking about, heroes, can be even thought of in a little bit more of an abstract perspective too, in terms of how you think about just, you know, um, the industry, competition, and you can think about sort of how you personalize that to some degree as well too. So no, very rarely, and I'm very rarely with, except for one exception I'll talk about in a second, do we ever suggest that leaders themselves are heroes. We would suggest how do they look for individuals that are influencing change in an organization, teams that are influencing change in an organization, other factors that are bringing forth, maybe even from the outside of the organization, that are part of the hero sphere, if you will, for that. So never a leader. However, though, sometimes it's an interesting little twist within story development is that after working with a group of leaders, they've defined a hero, we've developed their fuller story. Sometimes it's an interesting twist to actually then have the leader recast that story with them as the hero. And it depends on the topic, but sometimes what that actually brings forward, it's actually a great leadership development opportunity for thinking about how the leader thinks about his or her accountability. Going forward with that as well too. So what are they then delivering to the overall story as well?
So they're not necessarily sharing the story of themselves being the hero, but they're thinking about themselves as the hero so that they understand how they shape this change. Is that where I'm trying to understand?
Yeah, you're spot on. Yeah, I'm sorry, April. You're spot on. So it's more of a framework and a guideline and perspective for the leaders themselves in the role and the accountability that they would have to undertake. Maybe that's just more of a personal development game plan, if you will. It's part of that. Dare I say, it's part of the sponsorship plan, right? Right for that as well too.
Oh, I love this idea. So you're kind of in it. So when you're working with leaders, you're working with them on a couple of different levels. You're working with them on the level of the story and of identifying all of these key components, the possibilities and the hero. And then you're also working with them on their own internal stories so that they have an understanding of their role for that change, for that organization. Now, do you do this in sort of I'm sure you don't do it in a one day, here's your story, but tell me your process for helping leaders accomplish this.
Sure, and it does start really kind of though with an introduction, and almost it takes the approach of really kind of looking at it from a chapter by chapter development perspective here as well too. So we start to introduce the concept of storytelling, the value it can bring, and the opportunity it has from their own leadership capability. We usually start with sort of a high level, start to develop sort of a starting story, kind of at a higher level before we really get into really sort of more of a change initiative, just so that we can get experience, we can get traction with that, and a level of desire to move forward with this as well too. And then from there then we really get concentrated in really building out really the specific elements of the overall story. That tends to be then, work teams, smaller work teams, if you will. It does work better, obviously, in my opinion, in a team-like type of development because you are getting the benefit of collaboration then as well too in that process as well. And so we go through essentially brainstorming. I mean, many cases bring in, what we would, as change leaders, we would say is our stakeholder analyses, if you will, to have that as consideration for that as well too. And then go through the process of development of that. And then once we go through that, as we get to a level of alignment, and then here's a really important piece here, is that it's very important, and we encourage strongly, is that then, stories are meant to be told again and again and again. And one quote that I've heard as well too is that, some of the best stories happen is that when somebody else who was first hearing the story is then able to go tell the story to someone else as well too. I mean, that's really a great characteristic of an awesome story as well. And so we encourage then individuals, leaders we work with, about how they are consistent with it, how they practice, how they think about evolving their story, right? Because stories aren't static, and stories continue with that as well too. And so how do certain elements, as time marches forward, how do those become part of the process as well too?
So I really like this in particular, Greg, because I feel like this is kind of capturing what sponsorship's about without the, I don't know, sometimes I think the term sponsor is a little bit off-putting to leaders. I think that, it has a connotation almost that they're completely funding the entire change, which is not necessarily the case. I mean, what a sponsor is doing is really promoting that change and kind of embodying the change, not necessarily paying for the change, even though sometimes those two things go together. So it sounds to me like your approach really takes the focus off of this person being the sponsor and puts it more as this leader is sharing a story about what will happen. Is that correct?
Very much so, and it very much is taking is placing a very active responsibility, if you will, on that sponsor for sure, and so that he or she is very engaged, if you will, and is part of that whole experiential process that's taking place there with that as well. And I have to add one more piece to that, is that in order to really then also to be effective storyteller, that sponsor obviously needs to be actively engaged from a listening perspective then as well too, because the listening module and focus needs to always then inform how you think about evolving your story as well.
So I really enjoy hearing this, because I think one of the challenges for many people who are involved with innovation and change is the fact that we get a little bit anxious about approaching our sponsors, because they're very busy and they have a lot of commitments, a lot of priorities. I know this has been my own experience. And so I think in considering this more as a way to tell stories, a way to listen, it takes the pressure off as a change professional. It takes the pressure off of me of saying, here's your sponsorship plan, now go follow it, and invites me to have more of a dialogue with the leader.
Absolutely. And I think, that is definitely something I think all change leaders aspire to, right? And that, they are working with individuals who have a sponsorship role, how they are helping those individuals understand what that role is, and frankly, what the possibilities of that role can be as well too. It's almost as though the change lead can start thinking about, again, possibilities and really help shape then the specific agreement and responsibilities that the sponsor will take forward.
So how can I just ask you, Greg, because I, really respect you and the things that you've accomplished, the career you've had. How did you initially get involved with leading change and with change management?
Well, thank you for asking that. And, April, my background is more of an organizational communication. As I've really had the great fortune of working with many organizations, my view on communication has always been is how is it impacting, performance in an organization and with individuals. And it's not just a transaction of information sharing. It's actually how shared understanding is being created and driven forward. So when you start looking at organizational communication from that broader impact lens, it very much connects into and has to connect into the whole focus on really driving effective change with that as well too. And so that's been a basis for how I've sort of my career has unfolded, I'll say, with all of that. And I think the other component of that is that I've had also the great fortune and privilege of working really, as I mentioned earlier, with so many different types of leaders and so many different personalities of leaders in their communication and ultimately their change focus. While on a good number of occasions, I entered the discussion through a need around communication. When you start really diagnosing really what the outcomes are that the individual or team of individuals is looking for, you recognize, frankly, that's a change request, if you will, that's happening right there. That's a change opportunity, and we're looking to impact behaviors. We're looking to impact beliefs. We're looking to impact perspectives and attitudes with that as well, too. So that's really kind of how it's all sort of melded together for me throughout my career.
And then have you, I know that you must have experienced this at one point in time or another. Um, I have I have been in the situation at one point or another where, a change didn't go quite as well as we had hoped or as we had expected. And you can kind of look back at those and think like, oh, here's where I would have maybe done something differently if I had some sort of a do-over. Have you ever run into that situation, or if you've had a project that didn't quite go as you'd hoped, and what did you learn from that?
Oh gosh, of course. I think we all would say that we have had those experiences, and I think we need to humbly learn from all of those as well too. Um, so, I think that what I learned from that is just the opportunity to say, hey, from a lessons learned perspective, what were the things that I could have done in retrospect that would have helped guide something maybe to a little bit of a different course? What were some of the other factors that were happening from other participants, if you will, in the process too, and how that unfolded? And really to look at that from a solution orientation and say, how can we frankly still, with whether it be within that particular change activity or a next one, how do we learn and apply that then going forward? So, I've had I've done some things very explicitly different than in working with same leadership teams, but working with them in slightly different ways, based on just past learnings. And I think I'll relate that back to the evolution of stories, is that, change is never static, stories are never static, and that the only way that we will continue to have relevance in our role in providing value is that we must continue to apply those learnings as we go forward.
I agree. I think that when you are able to apply those lessons learned, you see them the next time. It's kind of like seeing the iceberg in the water. The next time you're headed through, you think, oh, I'm going to avoid that one this time. Can you tell me about a time when you worked on a communication or change or a leadership initiative that went really well, maybe went better than you had expected it to go?
Oh, thank you for asking. And, I think one of an example I'll share with you, and I'll keep it as general just for all the appropriate reasons. But I did have one opportunity that I really look back on saying that was a great learning moment for me as well too. And it was working for a client as they were looking to increase the number of research grant opportunities they could explore and invest in with academic institutions. And this client had marginal success in getting a good slate, if you will, of ideas and concepts. And so in working with the client, we offered up some suggestions in terms of how we could maybe do some things that might be a little bit uncomfortable, if you will, for some academic leaders and participants in a workshop. But the client agreed to it. And in a very simple way, though, what I'll share with you is that what we did is that we asked these academic leaders to bring forth some of their ideas that they would like to propose that this client invest in. What we did, though, then is we actually put these academic leaders through their own mini change process. Because what we then asked these leaders to do is that we asked them then to go look at another academic group, leader groups, ideas that they brought forward within the same workshop, and not to criticize them, but to build on them. And what was powerful in the room is that we had about 15 to 20 minutes of pure resistance staring me right in the face, because these academic leaders had such ownership in their own content, in their own ideas in this. And the mere request and asking of them to go appreciate somebody else's ideas and build on them, as I said, it took a good 20 minutes before we even had people physically move to that portion of the room. Well, we did that an additional 2 times. So they rotated an overall number of 4 times within that. And what was powerful for me is that I saw change happening right before my eyes, because as we got to cycles 3 and 4, we saw how change, the resistance piece, was easing. And we saw actually, we saw the figurative light bulbs going off, where the collaboration of ideas actually brought forward then 4 times as many ideas for the client that they had received from the prior workshop. Okay. And so it was, that wasn't a change initiative, wasn't described at that, but it ended up being actually a great example of how you could see leaders themselves going through their own change process right within a single day workshop as well.
Wow. Well, and I love that. And I know how hard it is to work with academics, having been at the University of Michigan and Michigan State University. So I have to give you credit for that, because it's intimidating, I think, just as working sometimes with, physician leaders as well could be somewhat intimidating. So kudos to you for figuring out how to help them get through their resistance on that and be able to, have some benefit from that communication and that thinking and collaborating together.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that, April.
So, Greg, we know each other. We originally met each other through the Association of Change Management Professionals, because we both worked on the standard for change management, which is published and is proprietary for the Association of Change Management Professionals. And can you tell me a little bit about what it was that drew you to working on the standard, and what benefit that you think the standard provides to change professionals?
Oh, awesome. I really appreciate the question, just because I think it's at the core of building the change management profession overall. And that's what really attracted me to be part of that. And what a great honor and privilege. As you know, 24 great thought leaders from around the world, coming together, really with a focused mission on how do we start to really put together in that framework the consistent and a best practice way to really address and implement change. And so what drew me to that was, what's always drawn me to the profession is there's something that we're building here. We're building a profession that is adding in more and more relevance in a world that is needing more and more effective implementation and change adoption. And so that is really the opportunity that I saw in becoming, an active member of that standards work group. And then I think the benefit of it is just that it's creating that foundation that not only change professionals, but individuals from any profession that are interested in driving effective change. It is a body of knowledge, right? It's a body of knowledge that individuals can refer to, can learn about, can reference, can apply within their not just even their professional lives, but there's even application in things outside of your daily profession as well too, with that as well. And so I think that's the benefit that standard is providing right now. It's really the base. It's a body of knowledge. It's a reference point that we can all rally around because it's a consistent focus for us right now. And that will only continue to evolve and strengthen as well into the future.
I agree. I think it's really exciting to have a body of knowledge collected where we can all reference it. And it's, for those people who are not aware of ACMP or not aware of the standard for change management, it is a free download. And in fact, I think I'll put a link to that free download for the standard on our page for your session, because I really think that the more people who understand that we have an approach and a way to go about looking at change, planning for change, executing change, and then making sure that change is sustainable, the better for our profession as well. Do you have a particular book that you love or would recommend to our viewers?
As I was thinking about that, and you somewhat planted that seed for me. There's a couple of books, if I could name two, actually, if you wouldn't mind. Sure. And again, they're a little bit more foundational for me. And it goes back to one of your first questions. One of the books goes back to one of your first questions, April, about sort of how my career is unfolded. And it's sort of a very pivotal book for me in that process. Was written by the gentleman by the name of Roger Dupree. And Roger wrote a book called Communicating for Change. And I think it's a powerful, powerful book. And I think one of the main tenets that I still, take from Roger's writings is that, one of the most realistic ways you can ever rationalize change in an organization is by turning stakeholders' eyes outward to the marketplace. And I think there's some really strong validity in how you really think about change in an organization. It very much is happening because of external forces, right? And I think that how you appreciate and understand that component, I think that's sort of core from a change leader perspective. And then the second book, I think also too, that sort of spurred me on then as I really kind of went down this path. It's called The Leadership Solution, written by a gentleman by the name of Jim Schaefer. And, Jim, I think very much goes into, in a very explicit and detailed way, really how leaders need to commit to that say and do balance and what that means from effectively driving change and being just strong, influential leaders in an organization. So they're a little bit outside of the change realm per se, but actually they fit right within it when you understand the viewpoints that each of those authors share.
Oh, those are excellent suggestions. We will put those on your session page as well, because I want people to be able to take a look at those books and to, be able to look them up and possibly purchase those books, because it's great to have great resources at your hands. And when you hear about a resource that somebody else has used and found really valuable, I truly appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing. Well, Greg, I really have loved our conversation today. And of course, I'm always happy to see you. And I appreciate so much your talking with us about leadership, storytelling, making sure that our leaders are, have the capacity to tell stories and truly understand that this is the way to help people get on board with change, as opposed to maybe just sending an email with the facts and figures. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, and thank you, April. It was just been a joy and a great discussion. Thank you for having me.
Take care. Thanks.